The blizzard had buried everything, roads, fences, even hope. For miles around, all that existed was white silence and the groan of the wind. Somewhere beyond the snowdrifts, a lonely cabin creaked under the weight of ice, its chimney long dead. Inside, a widow sat on the floor beside her 2 children, wrapped in what was left of a blanket. Their eyes were half open, their breaths shallow. Hunger had stripped away their voices until all that was left was a whisper, weak and desperate. When the knock came at the door, it didn't sound real. It was so soft, so unexpected, that for a moment Mary thought she imagined it. She pressed her hand against her heart and listened. There it was again, a slow, hesitant knock. With trembling fingers, she rose, pushing aside the frozen latch. The door opened to reveal a tall man in a heavy coat, snow clinging to his hat and shoulders. His horse stood behind him, steam rising from its flanks. The man looked at her, really looked, and saw the hollow cheeks, the bruised lips, the eyes filled with both fear and pride. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Slowly, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small loaf of bread, still warm from being wrapped in cloth near his chest. Mary's voice cracked as she whispered, "We haven't eaten in 5 days." He didn't answer. He just placed the bread in her trembling hands. And in that moment, something shifted, not just in her, but in him too. She stared at the bread, then at the stranger. "You don't even know us." He smiled faintly. "Don't need to. Hungry's hungry." That night, he stayed. The storm was too fierce to travel, so he brought his horse into the shed and helped her get the fire going again. Her children, Tommy, 8, and Ruth, barely 5, devoured the bread like it was a feast. The man shared his jerky with them, pretending he wasn't hungry, pretending his stomach wasn't twisting in pain. When the wind finally died down by dawn, he introduced himself as Caleb Turner, a rancher from 3 counties over. His herd had been scattered by the storm, and he'd been riding for days trying to find them. The storm had nearly beaten him down, but seeing Mary and her children gave him reason to keep standing. Mary learned quickly that Caleb was a man of few words but steady actions. He fixed the leaking roof, chopped wood, and fed the animals that had somehow survived. When he spoke, his voice carried a kind of quiet grief that matched her own. Her husband, Samuel Whitlock, had died of fever the previous spring. He'd been a good man, hardworking and gentle, but life on the plains had broken him too soon. Since then, Mary had been holding on by threads, one day at a time, one storm at a time. Caleb didn't pity her. He respected her strength. And that was what made her notice him in a way she hadn't noticed anyone since Samuel. Over the next few days, the snow began to melt. Caleb could have left, but he didn't. He stayed to mend fences, repair the barn door, and teach Tommy how to handle a rope. Mary cooked what little she had left, and though it wasn't much, they shared it like it was a banquet. At night, when the children slept, Mary and Caleb sat by the fire. They talked about loss, his wife, gone from a wagon accident years before, and her Samuel, whose grave lay beneath a frozen oak. But more than grief, they talked about survival. About what it means to keep living when your heart wants to stop. One evening, as the last of the storm clouds cleared and the stars came out, Mary looked across the firelight and said softly, "You've done more for us than anyone since Samuel passed. I don't know how to thank you." Caleb gazed into the flames. "Don't need thanks. Just, maybe don't give up." Her eyes filled with tears. "I almost did." He looked at her then, and in his eyes, she saw something raw and unspoken, loneliness, compassion, maybe something more. The days turned into weeks. Together, they rebuilt the farm, slowly, stubbornly. When the spring sun finally warmed the valley, the garden began to sprout again. Caleb taught Tommy to ride, and little Ruth started following him everywhere, calling him Mr. Rancher. It became harder for him to leave. Every morning he saddled his horse, and every evening he found another reason to stay. And every night, Mary found herself praying that he wouldn't go. One day, while repairing the corral, Caleb told her he was heading back to his ranch. "I've got work piling up," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "Can't run from it forever." Mary's heart sank. She forced a smile. "Of course. You've already done so much." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded and rode off. But his absence was heavier than the silence he left behind. The children asked when he'd come back. Mary didn't know what to say. Weeks passed. The fields bloomed, but Mary's spirit dimmed. She worked tirelessly, keeping the farm alive, but every sunset reminded her of him. She missed his steady presence, his quiet voice, his kindness. Then one summer evening, as she was washing clothes by the creek, she heard the sound of hooves. Her heart leapt before her mind could believe it. She turned, and there he was, riding toward her through the golden dust of dusk, hat in hand, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "Lost my way," he said when he stopped before her. "Thought maybe you could point me home." She tried to laugh, but her eyes betrayed her. "You found it already, Caleb." That night, he brought supplies, tools, and something wrapped in cloth. It was another loaf of bread, fresh, warm, and whole. He placed it on the table between them, his voice unsteady as he said, "Last time I came here, I only had bread to give. This time, I got more." She looked up, confused. He swallowed hard, then took her hand. "Mary Whitlock, you're the strongest woman I've ever known. I've spent years living half a life, waiting for something to make it whole again. You and those kids, you gave me that. So if you'll let me, I'd like to offer you more than food. I'd like to offer you my name." Her breath caught. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Then, through tears, she whispered, "You sure about that, Caleb Turner?" He smiled, the kind of smile that comes after a lifetime of storms. "Never been surer." The next Sunday, beneath the old oak tree where Samuel was buried, they said their vows. It wasn't a grand ceremony, just neighbors, the preacher, and two children who clung to Caleb's hands like he'd always been theirs. When he kissed Mary's forehead, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, peace. As seasons changed, the ranch and farm became one. Caleb built new fences, planted more fields, and raised cattle with Tommy by his side. Ruth grew up calling him Pa. Together, they rebuilt not just a home, but a life. Years later, when people in town spoke of them, they'd say it started with one act of kindness, one loaf of bread in the middle of a storm. But Mary knew better. It started the moment one broken soul reached out to another and decided that love, even after loss, was still worth the risk. And if you're watching this story right now, remember, kindness doesn't need wealth. It just needs courage. You never know whose life you might change with one simple act.